The Catholic Church is from false images presented in the media. Some of the greatest discoveries in sciences have been discovered by scientists who are Catholic. René Descartes, who discovered analytical geometry. Blaise Pascal invented the adding machine, the hydraulic press, and the mathematical theory of probability. Gregor Mendel founded modern genetics. Louis Pasteur, the founder of microbiology and the vaccine for rabies and anthrax. Nicholas Copernicus, who first developed scientifically that the Earth revolves around the sun. George Lemaître is credited with proposing the Big Bang Theory. And Alexander Fleming, the inventor of penicillin, just to name a few. There are 244 Catholic universities and colleges in the United States. Each one of them has a science program, not to mention all the Catholic universities and colleges around the world. The Catholic Church gave more financial aid and support to the study of astronomy over a 600-year period of time, beginning in the late Middle Ages, than any other institution or country. In fact, the Vatican has continuously maintained an observatory since the late 1300s, and recently Pope Benedict expanded that observatory. So, as we'll discuss, the Catholic faith is not at odds with scientific reasoning. Scientific reasoning and faith are very compatible. There's no conflict between studying creation and knowing our Creator. But the images we see presented on the issue are usually either negative or they're presented as absolutes. Science supports the Catholic faith, it's not at odds with it. They're not absolutes. It isn't a case of one or the other. Not only can you have both simultaneously, but it helps to have both simultaneously. I've got a couple of examples of some media images. And so the one on your left, if you can't read it, it starts at the top by saying, so you're a Christian who believes in evolution, eh? If evolution is true, the creation story is a myth. If it's a myth, Adam and Eve never existed. If Eve didn't exist, she never ate the forbidden fruit, which caused original sin. No original sin, no reason for Jesus to be sent to die on the cross. No Jesus equals no Christianity. But science and faith are compatible, right? I use this as an example to illustrate that there are many people who have a gripe with religion, and they try to present a very negative image. But that's not science. The first statement presents an opinion that only one, in this case science, can be true, and that both science and religion cannot coexist in truth. The statement, if evolution is true, then the story of creation is a myth, presents a statement that presupposes that the theory of evolution and the story of creation in the Bible are incompatible, but it presents absolutely nothing to support it. It then builds upon this false axiom. No scientist would present that. It violates the scientific method. The second image, the one on the right, is from Time magazine. Now, Time magazine is considered to be a respected news publication. In the past 40 years, both Time and Newsweek magazine have run several stories on the subject of science and God. But as we see from the title, even they present it as one or the other. Science versus God, as though they're locked in some cosmic battle with each other. Pope John Paul II once said, "Science can purify religion from error and superstition. Religion can purify science from idolatry and false absolutes. Each can draw from each other into a wider world, a world in which both can flourish. Science and religion form a duality. They're not at odds with each other. Don't be fooled by false imagery. Use your own analytical abilities to make your own informed judgments." Okay, so let's talk for a moment about what is science. One of the greatest things that science has given us is the scientific method. And in the scientific method, we begin by asking a question about what we've observed. The scientific method looks for evidence to settle the questions. We observe the world and we gather facts. From the question, we form a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a proposed explanation of a phenomenon. For it to be scientific, we need to be able to test it. To test it, we need data. In order to test a hypothesis, we must be able to collect data about that subject. A theory, a scientific theory, is a hypothesis that's undergone this level of rigorous testing and is thus generally held to be true. So we have to consider, what is science? Science can only ascertain what is. It can't look at and study what should be. Religion, on the other hand, seeks to ascertain what will be. Science cannot answer questions that are outside of this empirical method, such as, why am I here? What happens after I die? Who am I? Science can, though, help us to understand better our relationship with God. By studying creation, it helps us to better understand our Creator. And one other important point to remember is that as scientists, we're not always right. But the scientific method, it provides us with a very good means to test our theories and then correct our mistakes. I want to define one term for you before we get into the science piece, and that is an allegory. An allegory uses symbolism, usually through a story, to convey a moral truth. It's a way to illustrate a complex idea in a manner that would be easily understood to the person who's listening or who's reading. They usually convey hidden messages through symbolic figures, through images, or through actions that take place. The reason why I want to define the term allegory and have it in the forefront of your conscious thought is because the Bible contains allegories. You have to look beyond the stated words into what the real meaning is when you're reading the Bible. This is an area where science can help us to better understand and appreciate our faith. Okay, so let's get into a little bit of the science. Why don't we start with the creation of the universe? The Big Bang Theory, and I'm referring to the actual theory, not the TV show, is an attempt to explain how the universe was developed from a tiny, dense state of matter into what it is today. It doesn't explain what initiated the creation of the universe, or what came before the Big Bang, or what's even outside of our known universe. The Big Bang Theory describes the development of the universe from a time just after it came into existence up until today. The most important concept when talking about the Big Bang is expansion. The universe is expanding. It's getting bigger. Many people think that the Big Bang is about a moment in time when all matter and energy in the universe were concentrated into a very small, dense, tiny point. This point then exploded, shooting matter out all across space, and the universe was born. In fact, the Big Bang explains the expansion of space itself, which in turn means everything within that space is spreading out from everything else. Today, when we look up at the night sky, we see galaxies separated by what appears to be huge expanses of space. At the earliest moments of the Big Bang, all the matter and energy we could observe was compressed, then it expanded out. As a result of that, we have uncovered the four basic forces of the universe, and those four basic forces are gravity, electromagnetism, weak nuclear force, and strong nuclear force. Most of us are familiar with electromagnetism and gravity. Weak and strong nuclear force do not refer to nuclear weapons. They refer to the forces that hold our atoms in place. At the beginning of the Big Bang, these were all considered to be a unified force. And it's only after the Big Bang that these forces separated. It's still a mystery to scientists how this happened. The Big Bang does not explain the initial matter. Scientists are working on that, though, how matter could be created from nothing. But we still don't have an answer to that. Quantum theory in physics is being investigated to try to help us understand how the universe came into being. Hubble, another famous scientist, observed that the universe is expanding, and the current theory points to the expansion speeding up, which is not actually consistent with an explosion. And so we're still investigating what's causing that. Current assumptions point to this concept called dark matter and dark energy, which are neither observable nor detectable, but could make up as much as 97% of the universe's matter and energy. This means that 97% of the universe is not measurable. It means we can't study it. We can't collect data on it. Right. To give you an analogy, one of the best analogies I've heard about the description of the universe is, picture the universe as all of the water contained within the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. Now picture a teaspoon of water. What we know about the universe today is the teaspoon, but our understanding of it increases every day. Okay, now let's consider the story of creation. The story of creation is in the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis was written about 3300 BC. There are 35 sentences in the book of Genesis that provide a description of the origin of the universe. Only 35. And remember, this was a description of how the universe was formed, written for a people who lived thousands of years ago. These people didn't have schools. Written languages were just starting to develop, and only a minuscule portion of the population could read or write. In fact, it's really only been in the last 150 years that the majority of the population can read or write. Do any of you have younger brothers or sisters? Picture trying to explain the origin of the universe to them when they're 4 or 5 years old. You would have to use very clear, very simple explanations in language that would be understandable to them. And these stories have to be retold, so they have to be brief, they have to be short to be remembered. You need allegories in order to get this point across. And so the story of creation is an allegory. Sorry. St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine, two of the greatest Catholic theologians, and more recently Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict, have all stated and interpreted Genesis as teaching the truth about creation in a non-literal, non-scientific way. The Bible was never intended to be an encyclopedia of knowledge, and we don't interpret it that way. Genesis tells us that God created the world in 7 days. You hear people who will scoff at that and use it as a means to say, our faith can't possibly be used as a means to explain creation. You couldn't possibly create the entire universe in 7 days. Besides, why 7 days? Why not 8? Why not 9? Why not make it 20? Why the number 7? Well, we have to go to the language in which the Bible is written in, which is ancient Hebrew. The word 7 is symbolic. Again, 7 is an allegory. It means perfection and completeness. So when the book of Genesis says God created the world in 7 days, it's conveying a message to the original readers in a language that would be clear to them that a perfect God created a perfect universe. In Genesis, at the end of each verse, at the end of each day, is the phrase, "It was good." God provided us with a means to exist in a covenantal relationship with Him. The Old Testament is centered around the first covenant with God. So we shouldn't be surprised that the first covenant with God starts with the very beginning of Genesis. We don't start the story of a relationship with God in the middle of the book. We start it at the beginning. What the creation story tells us is that the universe was created in an orderly fashion by a divine God. And this is a key point. Not the detail about how the earth was formed, how the oceans were created, how the planet cooled, enabling an atmosphere to form. The orderly creation led to the beginnings of science. Without things happening in an orderly manner, there is no science. Laws of science are based upon things occurring the same way repeatedly if there is no change. Our understanding continues to change over time. Scientists believe that evolution took place over millions and millions of years, very slowly developing. However, recent data analyzed from fossil rocks point to a much more sudden separation. of water and land, and a much more sudden development of plant life on Earth. This is actually consistent with what happened in day 3 of the book of Genesis. We've come a long way in 2,000 years. Yet it's ironic, we still hear people today who want to have an axe to grind with religion, scoff at the Genesis account. It's very similar to the account 2,000 years ago when people scoffed at Jesus when he said he would rebuild the temple in 3 days. Some people just don't get what an allegory is. If you put it in its proper context, look beyond the surface, develop a real understanding before you rush to judgment, that is consistent with the scientific method. Okay, let's consider, was creation part of a plan, or was it random? Is it just dumb luck that we're here? Albert Einstein, a noted physicist, once said, "The human mind is not capable of grasping the universe. We're like a little child entering a huge library. The walls are covered to the ceilings with books in many different tongues. The child knows that someone must have written these books, but it doesn't understand who or how. It does not understand the language in which they're written, but the child knows a definite plan in the arrangement of the books, a mysterious order which it does not comprehend, but only dimly suspects." Probability theory in mathematics tells us the likelihood that something is going to happen. Right? We've all seen this. If we flip a coin enough times, 50% of the time it will be heads, 50% of the time it will be tails. If we roll 1 dice, the probability that we're going to get a 6 is 16.67% of the time. If you roll 2 dice, the probability that you'll get a 12 is only 2.78% of the time. As we add more conditions, the probabilities get smaller. We see that pattern, right? And it doesn't take a lot of conditions to have those probabilities start to get to be really small. So let's look at this from the standpoint of the context of the creation of the Earth and how we come into being. The Earth is estimated to be approximately 4 billion years old, but I won't go that far back. If we use just as one example, the age of the dinosaurs, we know they've been extinct for about 65 million years. The most common theory is that an asteroid about 6 miles in diameter hit the Earth off the coast of Mexico. Meteorites hit the Earth all the time. We get hit every single day, including today. But almost always they're just pea-sized rocks when they do. It's estimated there's about a 1 in 100 million chance that an asteroid will actually hit the Earth. But without that one event happening, there would have been no extinction of the dinosaurs. No extinction of the dinosaurs means no age of mammals, from which we as a human species evolved. We needed that event to occur. Since that time, the archaeological record shows us the evolution of primates to man. However, there's still big gaps in that archaeological record. Nonetheless, what we think about as modern man has been around for somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years. Now, different scientists vary in their estimate, but they all agree with that range. In both cases, it's a very short period of time. Consider all the conditions that had to go right in order for modern man to evolve to where we are today. Those number of conditions that had to go right for us to be here today is beyond the billions. Remember the point here? We added 35 conditions and we're down to a probability of 2%, just over 2%. When we get into adding billions of conditions, the probability becomes an infinitesimally small number that everything occurred randomly. One colorful way that I've heard this described is that the level of precision needed for every condition to go right that enabled us to be here today would have to be so precise that if you could throw a dart across the entire universe, you'd have to hit a target 1 millimeter in diameter on the other side. Pretty phenomenal. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about evolution and creationism, which we frequently see reflected as evolution versus creationism. Again, this false idea of presenting the two perspectives as absolutes. One must be right, the other must be wrong. This concept of false axioms. In the theory of evolution, Darwin in his book, The Origin of the Species, put forth that, in general, life developed from lower forms through random mutations very, very slowly. According to Darwin, evolution took millions and millions of years. Most scientists generally accept the principle of Darwin's theory, but they recognize that big gaps exist in the fossil record. The story has not been completely told. So we don't fully subscribe to Darwin's theory of natural selection because we don't have evidence to fully support it. Darwin stated that nature never makes jumps, but our fossil record shows that nature does make jumps. We see jumps in the development of creatures, including man. Our species, we're referred to as Homo sapiens, first began to develop 200,000 years ago, at a time when there were other human-like creatures, such as Neanderthals. The beginning of our genetic development has changed over time. Are we genetically different than the Homo sapien ancestors who lived 10,000 to 200,000 years ago? Well, the answer to that is absolutely yes. We know that, we have evidence of that, we've been able to measure that. In fact, it's very likely that the rate of evolution of our species has continually accelerated at a much greater pace from this period of 10,000 years to forward than in that 190,000 years prior to that. Most of this is due to the fact that our human population has grown as well. We've moved into new kinds of environments, including cities. We've been subject to new natural selection pressures. But if you consider the following, modern civilization developed approximately 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. This too is consistent with the book of Genesis. Our immune systems have changed radically. We've had changes in our diet. We've had subtle changes, even things like blue eyes. For those of you who have blue eyes, that gene has only existed for about the last 6,000 years. For those of you who have fathers or grandfathers who are bald, that too is a more recent genetic occurrence. All right, where do Adam and Eve fit into this? Are we all descendants of a single couple? Again, this is an allegory. We don't take that literally. But what we do know is that man is not the only intelligent creature on the planet. We've taught chimps to communicate via sign language. We know that whales and dolphins communicate within their species. We can train dogs, we can train seals, we can train other animals. Right? But what distinguishes us from other creatures is that we're made in God's image. And this concept of being made in God's image means that we possess a soul. It also distinguishes us from Neanderthals and other early forms of human primates. We're the only creature on the planet, in the history of the planet, that demonstrates a desire to understand how we were created, why we were created, and what happens to us after we die. There are people who take every word of the Bible literally. They're called biblical fundamentalists. Biblical fundamentalists, as Father Peter mentioned, are people who believe the earth was created 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. Where they get that number from is they start with Adam and Eve and they count the generations up to Jesus using an approximate length of time for each generation. Catholics are not biblical fundamentalists. We don't take every word of the Bible literally. At some point in our evolution, though, and again, we're back in the 6,000 to 10,000 year time period, we were endowed by our Creator with a soul. That's what the concept of being made in God's image means. We don't merely cease to exist when our life ends, as do all these other intelligent creatures. Evolution and creationism are not opposing beliefs. They actually fit very well together. In the late 1880s, in response to the First Vatican Council, the Church stated that true science helps us understand the nature of God. In 1950, through a papal encyclical, the Vatican stated that the theory of evolution is not inconsistent with Catholic teaching. on the last piece of science, something a little bit more current, a little bit more timely, and that's stem cell research, a much more recent controversy. Because what's been portrayed in the media was that the Catholic Church is opposed to stem cell research. It's not entirely accurate. There are two types of stem cells. There are embryonic stem cells and adult stem cells. The Church is not opposed to adult stem cell research. The process to extract adult stem cells is like giving blood. The cells are extracted, your body will regenerate them. The Church, however, is opposed to embryonic stem cell research. Embryonic stem cell research is abortion. There are other scientists, both Catholic and non-Catholic, who are also opposed to embryonic stem cell research, by the way. It's not just a Catholic issue. Almost everyone in the world, regardless of their faith, believes we should not kill innocent people, even if by killing them it will advance our scientific knowledge. In fact, within the scientific method, scientists review experiments proposed by other scientists in order to ensure that the way in which they're going to conduct that experiment will not harm human subjects. One of the basic tenets of all medical doctors is called the Hippocratic Oath, and it states, do no harm. Embryonic stem cell research kills human embryos. It kills babies. We believe a human embryo is life. And I recognize that our country's deeply divided on that issue. But biology helps us to understand the issue better. Because biology tells us that to live is to have self-generated activities. The growth and increased specialization of cells contributing to the good of an entire organism demonstrates that an embryo is a living being. So is the embryo human? Well, the genetic material that makes up the embryo is from a human mother and a human father. What else could it be? So, whether you're talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness from the Declaration of Independence, do no harm from the Hippocratic Oath, thou shalt not kill from the Ten Commandments, it's all about the same thing. We need to respect the rights of everyone to be able to live their lives. So let me conclude today by telling you that the study of science, it helps us better understand our place in the universe. Every day we continue to increase our understanding. Yeah. Many of the theories listed there, they've all been discovered within the past 100 years. Not only does science help us better understand how we came into being, but it helps us to better understand our faith by helping to reveal some of the meanings in the allegories in our scriptures. Throughout your entire life, you'll seek to be closer to God. Although science can't explain everything, the study of it helps us to better understand our faith by providing us with evidence that reinforces our beliefs. With that, I thank you, and I'd like to open it up for questions.
Now we get to the point where somebody has to be the brave one and raise their hand first, because I know there's always that fear and trepidation. God bless you, sir, for your courage. Question? Please. Sure.
I liked your speech.
Thank you very well. I didn't hear it. He said, I like your speech.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
I shouldn't be saying thank you for it. Well, I like yours too, though. Okay. Wait till the homily.
Any other questions, comments? Anything on your mind?
This is something that you're, I think, bombarded with very frequently, and the hope that we had was to make this central point. That if you look at Scripture and if you look at science, the way that we do in the Catholic Church, and you understand that the Bible is something that was written over 5,000 years ago, that it was intended to communicate a symbolic story, the book of Genesis, a symbolic story that teaches us moral truth. It's not a scientific theory. So, does anyone have any questions about that? I keep talking, but I would really prefer if somebody has a question. And if you're shy, you want to ask a question, whisper it in the ear of one of your teachers, and they'll ask it for you. Anybody else? Was that a question, or are you scratching your nose? I got excited for a second there. I saw a hand. You're scratching your head. This is terrible. Yes, thank you. God bless you.
Wasn't the Big Bang Theory not proven?
Was it not proven?
Yeah, because it's a theory.
It depends on what you're referring to. You know, there were people who at one point in time had a conception that the Big Bang Theory is a theory of the creation of the universe. It's not a theory of the creation of the universe. It's about an expanding universe, and you know all the data thus far still points to the fact that the universe is expanding. I think what you might mean though is that when we use the term explosion, think about an explosion here, of something here on Earth. A bomb explodes. What happens is that bomb explodes, the matter and energy is forced out, and it eventually dissipates. Right? It gets to a point where it stops. The data that we have does not support an explosion. It does not support the bang portion of the Big Bang, because we would expect by now that as you're measuring the expansion of the universe, you would see it start to slow down, and we have no data that supports that. I think that's what you're referring to.
Have you ever heard the word hypothesis?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hypothesis is the idea where you look at something and you say, I think it might mean this. So let me test it. Now, if you test the hypothesis and the tests that you do prove the hypothesis sufficiently enough, then we call it a theory. But there's nothing in science or mathematics or anything like that we ever take from theory to certainty. There are a few things we call law of gravity, right? So, what's going to happen if I let go of my keys? Law of gravity. We know it's a law, right? But so when we say theory of the Big Bang Theory, that doesn't mean it's false. What that does mean is we have so much credible evidence to support the hypothesis that we moved it from a hypothesis to a theory. And if science keeps studying it as they are, then it someday might become a law, but it hasn't been studied enough. So often people say, oh, it's just a theory. Well, that's ignorance. And I don't mean that you're being ignorant. What I'm saying is when people say that, what they're really saying is, pardon my language, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. When people say that, oh, it's just a theory. No. A theory is something that's a well-demonstrated hypothesis. Does that make sense?
Again, add one more point. You're actually not being ignorant, you're being a scientist. Because if you look at if you look at any scientific theory, we never get it right the first time. What ends up happening is each person who's studying in that area will contribute towards the theory and improve upon it. Sometimes that improvement is this much. Sometimes we make great advances. You're absolutely right. If you look at the original proposed Big Bang Theory, the way it was described, it gave this impression. Big explosion at some point in the universe, finite space. We don't find evidence that supports that.
Oh my gosh, a lot of itchy scalps here today. I see hands going up and getting excited. While somebody else thinks of the next question, a bit of proof in regards to the Big Bang Theory. I don't know if you've heard this before. Have you ever had, been on the road and a fire engine goes by you? You know how when it's coming towards you, the pitch gets a little louder, and then when it goes by, the pitch gets a little lower? I'm not going to do a silly sound to demonstrate this, but you guys know what I'm talking about? When something is moving away from us, the light changes. So when something's moving away from us, light is like a little wave that travels through space. Because it's moving away from us, the wave spreads out. And so we can look through a telescope and measure how fast everything is moving away from our galaxy by what's called a red shift. So there's a little bit of a red hue, like the fire engine that's moving away, and now it sounds different. It's It's the same thing in regards to galaxies that are moving away from us. And so we can do all kinds of really incredible math and show, yeah, the universe is expanding. This supports the general theory of Big Bang. Does that help? Okay, it's a lot of information, but questions, concerns, comments, complaints? Somebody was two brave people were the first to ask questions. See, I'm being the mean person up here calling people idiots, but any other, please. Mr. Biazzi.
Throughout the history of the Catholic Church, haven't there been times when they've been less accepting to science? And why do you think that? Why do you think that was?
Throughout the history of science, hasn't there been moments where the Catholic Church has been less accepting of science?
I can think of a good one.
Yeah, well here, go for it.
One good one, Sal, the Catholic Church has taken it on the chin over its handling of Galileo for almost 400 years now. If you're not familiar with Galileo was an Italian astronomer who lived in the 1600s. And Galileo was a big proponent of the concept of heliocentricity, which means that the Earth revolves around the sun, not that the sun and the rest of the solar system revolve around the Earth. The Earth is not the center of the universe. We now know that, but that was long believed to be true. And so the story, though, behind it is not one of science. Because first of all, Galileo is not the person who put forth the idea that the Earth revolves around the sun. Nicholas Copernicus was, and I mentioned Nicholas Copernicus was a Catholic astronomer. He lived just prior to this time period, in the mid-1500s, when he put this forth. What Galileo did, though, was Galileo wrote a book in order to promote this. And the book was called The Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. And in the book, in order to illustrate his point, he created a character called Simplicio, which is, I don't speak Italian, but roughly translates to the word simpleton. And the quotes in the book that are attributed to Simplicio were direct quotes from speeches that the Pope at the time, Pope Urban, had made. And so the church viewed this as an attack on Galileo.